Tonight on Basic Black, we'll explore highlights from the presidential debates and ask the question, what issues were completely ignored or got very little attention?
Our panel tonight: Phillip Martin, senior reporter, 89.7 WGBH Radio; Cindy Rodriguez, journalist in residence, Emerson College; Callie Crossley, host and moderator, Boston Public Radio, 89.7 WGBH Radio; Kenneth Cooper, editor, The Trotter Review, UMass, Boston; and Kim McLarin, assistant professor of writing, literature, and publishing, Emerson College. To join the conversation, please visit our website at basicblack.org.
We are just about a little over 2 weeks until voting day. And with that as a context, we're going to explore some issues that came up or didn't come up out of the presidential debates. But first I want to put this context on. I don't really believe in a lot of polling, but there's some important polls that have come out since the last presidential debate this past week. The national polls say that, one specifically by Gallup, say that Romney is ahead by 7 points. However, in the swing states, President Obama is ahead. So we have split polls there, some by Marist, some by the Wall Street Journal, but a variety of them that show him with comfortable lead: Ohio, Wisconsin, and Virginia. Little lead there. It's swing states, he seems to be holding firm to his lead, but nationally right now, at least by Gallup's polling, Romney is 7% ahead. So that's just a context.
Yeah, the Gallup poll, though, was an outlier.
That's right.
Yes.
The rest of the polls are very close, and you can tell the race is very close, those national polls, and a couple of them, or a few of them, Obama's just over 50%, and there are one or two where Romney's reached 50%, right. And the spread is pretty small. So I think the Gallup poll, for whatever reason, is an outlier that doesn't reflect the status of the race. It really is pretty close, I think.
Well, I don't even want to linger on the polling, because, that really gets us to the horse race question, and, what we want to talk about here are what you heard from the presidential debates that you think it's important to highlight, and what you didn't see that should be discussed. You want to start, Kim?
Well, the one thing I didn't hear, and I didn't expect to hear, but I was hopeful, was about the mass incarceration of black men. I think I had some hope that not that these two are directly related, but the conversation about guns that also didn't get answered. The question didn't get answered directly by either candidate about banning assault weapons or semi-automatic weapons, I guess. Mitt Romney informed us that automatic weapons are illegal in the United States, which is not strictly true, but let's set that aside. But issues of specific concern to black people, one of which I think is the new Jim Crow incarceration of African American men, found no traction. So that's my number one that I wish would come up, but I didn't really expect that it would.
For people who didn't watch that debate, that was an issue that was raised by one of the Real People questioners at the town hall, which was moderated by Callie Crossley, and the questioner asked, what's about assault weapons? Is there any effort to ban them? And both candidates, both Mitt Romney and President Obama, decided to talk about Mitt
Romney started talking about marriage. Somehow he linked assault weapons, the prevalence of accessibility to assault weapons, to marriage. I don't even know how he got from here.
Well, I think he was trying to go to a cultural point about if we have strong families, then that decreases crime. I believe that's where he was going.
Also,
President Obama brought up the violence in Chicago, just to put that on the table.
That's right. It was also a way of not talking about the Second Amendment too much, not focusing on it too much,
for fear
that his record in Massachusetts might be seen as contradictory, which the president sought to show by saying that he was for assault weapons before he was against assault weapons, trying to make that juxtaposition. But when you talk about issues, among the issues, of course, often not highlighted in presidential debates is a focus on poor people, on poverty, because we have embraced the middle class almost as a cliche. It's both a cliche and obviously it's practical from the points of view of these two candidates. They're appealing right now largely to suburban moms. at this point, middle-class suburban moms, and that's their main focus right now in trying to consolidate
white middle-class
suburban moms and trying to consolidate the vote among Latinos and trying to consolidate the vote among African Americans. And in doing so, the focus on poverty, real poverty, which has increased exponentially in the country, not just over the last 4 years because of the recession, but actually over the last 30 years because of a number of factors, including the income inequality has grown dramatically in the country. So it would be good to have some focus, to have a real balanced look at poverty in this country. I don't expect that to happen in a presidential election because these are not their constituents. They don't believe poor people vote. And when I say they, I do believe I'm talking about both Mitt Romney and President Obama. So their emphasis, that's going to be further down the pike in terms of an issue.
It's not just a matter of belief, though. It's a matter of pattern. The fact is, the more money you make, the more likely you are to vote, and vice versa.
Right.
Poor people don't vote in nearly the percentages that people are more prosperous do. I was surprised that in the second debate that Mitt Romney even mentioned the word poverty twice. And his purposes in doing so were kind of strange to me. Maybe that was the way of working the food stamps and trying to hang that around the president's neck. It was also maybe trying to bait Obama into a discussion about poverty, because he didn't really respond to that. He did not really respond specifically to that. One of the things I would have liked to have heard discussed, and it would have taken a deeper discussion of not just health care coverage, but health care costs. And I think in the discussion of health care costs is a good place to introduce health disparities. Because the fact of the matter is the disparate impact of disease and death on Black and Latino and Native American folks. Everybody who has insurance is paying for that. Everybody who gets medical treatment can pay that. And if you squeeze that out of the system, it in fact would be a cost control. It would be a restraining growing cost.
Well, Cindy, one number that I think people know with regard to cost in health care, $716 billion. That's what Romney Ryan has accused President Obama of cutting out of the Health Care Act, the cutting out of other places to pay for his Health Care Act, specifically Medicare, and they've said they're not going to do that. However, as we know, Congressman Paul Ryan has a budget that cut the exact same amount, $716 billion. Wondering what you heard that stood out for you in the presidential debates and what you thought was glaringly missing.
Well, what I thought was interesting is that I'm on Facebook and I'm posting my thoughts and opinions about what's going on, and I'm seeing what my friends are saying, and it's interesting. So I live in this progressive bubble, and so we're all saying, oh, you know, Obama's correct about this, Romney's incorrect. And as a journalist, then I step out of that bubble and I go to PolitiFact and I want to see, well, you know, where are people standing on this? And I found it interesting that Obama sometimes stretched the truth, as did Romney. But we're having these conversations in these bubbles, and we're not able to see, the bigger picture. And I think a big issue that I think we need is reform, because the political system in Washington can't continue the way that it is, with lobbyists basically writing bills and paying for a congressman, if I can be so bold to say that, to pass these bills. And so we're not talking about ways to clean up the system, and I am so fearful of what is to come after this election because of Citizens United and what that means in terms of the way the election panders to those individuals who are just pouring in millions of dollars to have their say and to quiet, to a certain degree, even Obama, who can't speak about certain issues because people in Wall Street are upset with him. Rich people are very angry with him. How dare you call us, these greedy fat cats? So.
Well, what issue would you have liked for them to have addressed, because they're not doing reform?
They're not going to do any of these issues that we're talking about. And that's what's the frustrating thing about it, is that these issues of poverty, healthcare disparity, which touches on racial issues, anything that touches on racial issues, and neither one is going to talk about. And in some ways, Obama is more constrained from talking about. And certainly the issues of reform. That's the frustrating thing. And what's interesting is that the question is, how are voters perceiving that, and why are voters not demanding or requiring more substantive conversations? I thought the questions, I'm curious what people thought about the questions from the audience member, the undecided, not undecided, what was the phrase? Uncommitted.
They say undecided, but now the new term is low interest voters. That meaning that people have not been paying attention. So that's a group of people who want to be informed, but haven't had a chance to pay attention. So now they're paying attention. So therefore, low interest.
But the people in that audience were not necessarily low.
No, they were non-committed.
They were non-committed.
Yes, but I'm saying, but the new terminology is low interest.
Terminology.
Okay.
Yes. And it's funny. I actually thought some of those questions were very good. The question, the African American man asked a question that seemed to have come from his heart.
He was awful.
I'm not talking about his style. I'm talking about his heart right now. And it seemed to be very, he seemed very concerned about voting again for President Obama.
Let me remind people what the question was. He got up and said, I voted for you 4 years ago. I'm concerned. It seems everything is more expensive now. I don't know what to expect. And what could I expect from you in 4 years?
Very good, Callie. I was trying my best to remember that.
I remember
what's wrong with that question.
I remember it as, "What have you done for me lately?" Is the way I remember it as. Why should I? Which is it's a legitimate question, and I actually think I don't understand why the President Obama has failed to lay out a more clear and concise and accessible agenda for what he is going to do. I think he's playing way too much time attacking Romney. I guess he has to, but so I think he can certainly be faulted for that. But I personally just thought that question was.
Well, there were several questions. There were questions about immigration that I thought were good. Yeah. There was a question about how would you mischaracterize, or how do you think you've been mischaracterized, which was a summary question.
I thought the gas prices was a good question.
Yeah.
So I thought that,
I want to go back to your point about the gentleman who asked a question about from his heart, because as I listened to both of their responses, and actually former Governor Mitt Romney came closer, but neither one of them really responded to the emotional part of the question.
No. Precisely.
And I was a little puzzled by that, because it was clearly emotional, and there was lots of room for them to go there and wrap around the other stuff that they wanted to say, and yet they didn't.
And I bet you were saying to yourself probably what I was saying to myself. How would Bill Clinton have answered?
Right.
I know how he would answer.
I feel your pain.
But I think you have a debate whose tone is basically combat.
Yes.
And then to switch from that to I feel your pain takes perhaps more adept politicians around the stage than that. I mean, Bill Clinton had run for office, governor of Arkansas, every 2 years for who knows how long that was, a long time. He was adept at that kind of campaigning. And, this is Mitt Romney's actually, third campaign?
Yes.
Yeah, not that many.
But it was glaring. I mean, I tend to agree that when someone is speaking from their heart and you don't respond, but that's because both are on their game, and they were both trying to get their points out. And it didn't matter what the question was. They were going to get their points out.
Well, to Cindy's point, to avoiding game. That's the game they're on.
Exactly.
Exactly. The idea was they knew what they had to do that evening. President Obama had to basically resuscitate, resurrect his polling, his base. His base was depressed in the dumps, feeling that he had gotten beaten up, and he had in the first debate. And so he went in there saying, "These are the things I have to accomplish," and answering it in a certain way. The way this gentleman perhaps wants me to answer is not going to help me accomplish what I need to accomplish. And he went in there to accomplish those goals, and he succeeded, by the way.
All right. So what about coming up? The one that's coming up on Monday. We can't review that, but based on what you've seen thus far, it's supposed to be focused totally on foreign policy.
Yes.
But to your point earlier, Phil, I personally believe Bob Schieffer is going to come back around with some domestic issues. Because Bob Schieffer is the moderator from CBS Face the Nation. He's very good. I think he's going to circle back around, and they better be ready for it. But let's assume that a lot of it is about foreign policy. The first hard-hitting issue is obviously going to be about Libya and Benghazi, and that really has not been satisfactorily debated or discussed between the two of them, despite the kerfuffle at the last presidential debate.
Right, and that will come up as will Syria. Those
and Bin Laden.
And Bin Laden.
He's already said he's going to say the words Osama bin Laden.
And I think you're right. They're going to I think Schieffer understands that there is a sort of almost a artificial separation
Yes.
between the foreign and the domestic.
And it's the last debate.
And it's the last debate.
Yeah.
So those things will definitely come together. But expect to hear a lot about Benghazi, expect to hear a lot about Libya, expect to hear a lot about, in the view of Governor Romney, about the failure of the administration to respond adequately to Syria. And then, of course...
And Iran and nuclear weapons.
And Iran and nuclear weapons. And then the president, of course, has his own record to stand on, which he can point out. Yeah, he's the guy who got Osama bin Laden. But more so than that, he never said that was the end of al-Qaeda, as some have suggested. I've not heard that from any of the administration officials, saying that by getting bin Laden...
This is all about parsing.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think there's a danger in too much parsing for either candidate. I think people, especially on foreign policy, let's be honest, Americans are interested, but not that interested. What we're more interested in is how a leader projects himself to the world. The details that I hate to say it, but most Americans couldn't find Syria on a map, even today, right? So I think there's a danger for both candidates, and particularly Romney, in too much parsing. I think he got his hat handed to him with the parsing in the second debate. That was a gotcha moment. Talk about being on Facebook, and everybody went, bam, right?
But to be clear, his where he was going was not wrong. It's the way that he phrased
it's true.
it. Yes.
It's true. It's
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure where he was going was right, because where he was going, he was making a presumption about the way the State Department and the White House communicated.
He wasn't making a presumption. He said, "You telling me you did not say acts of terror."
Yes,
That's clear.
but the implication in that is that there was some type of cover-up, and that's what's problematic. The notion that there being some type of cover-up is problematic. I
don't take that as cover-up.
I think the
He
implication
didn't
was
apply the
incompetence.
word terrorism to the actual attack.
Right.
Yes.
And
was not
he
doing
used it.
cover-up.
He spoke it he said that word.
But if you listen to his spokespersons, they have in fact talked about they have in fact questioned, was there a cover-up?
And President Obama had answered that part before they got to this part about did you not say
But I'm
acts
just
of
saying
terror?
this is part and parcel of the argument that's being proffered.
Yeah.
Well, but this brings us to another point about the debates, which is the whole nature of the going back and forth, the combative nature, as you've said it. A couple of people have written about it, through the filter of black folk or brown folk. In that, Kelly Goff wrote for TheRoot.com. Before, President Obama was afraid to come across as angry black man.
Right.
So that's why he was tapped down on the first one. Now, I personally disagree with that, but I do think that I don't disagree with it. I think that was part and parcel of what he had to do. But this time, this is what I disagree with, is that she said he wasn't afraid. I think he was just more aggressive, but he stayed well clear of being angry black man.
He always has to be careful about being perceived as an angry black man. I think he clearly has to. I disagree that was part of the first the strategy. But I do think it's interesting. Maybe we could talk about the Tag Romney comment about wanting to slug the president, and Ta-Nehisi Coates and The Atlantic made a really good point that if you can imagine the reversal of that, if anyone on President Obama's
you mean Romney's son?
Romney's son, who was quoted as saying he wanted to run down there and slug Obama. I mean, that's outrageous.
Let me just say, Tag Romney was interviewed on a radio program after the debate. And the interviewer said, "Boy, as a son of Mitt Romney, you must get really upset when you see anyone coming after your father," and President Obama sort of coming at him. And how did that make you feel? And he said, "Well, I want to run down on the stage and slug him." But he then followed up by saying, "Of course, that is not what one does."
But no, he said that's not what one does because of Secret Service. He did not say that. He didn't say because he's the president. No, it was noticeable. That's the clear point. He did not, and nowhere in his comments did he acknowledge that Barack Obama is the president, and that you do not only slug him, you don't speak about him in those terms. And I think there's a underlying.
Well, there was a lot of testosterone out on that stage, and maybe the son picked up on his father's dose. There was one occasion when Romney a little too quickly stepped toward Obama, and like he's going to get in his face. And Barack very coolly sort of pivoted and walked back towards his chair. And I'm thinking, if he's responding like he should be, in his mind he said, "Man, if we weren't up on this stage in front of these lights, I'd have something for you."
That's a really important part of the whole debate is the 60% of what people say, is heard, and the rest, and who knows, depending on who out there in TV land is watching, right? Maybe most of it is, kind of going over their heads. But they are looking at visual cues, and they're looking at, who looks tougher, and even just little things like when they were at one point, they were both, the big photo of the next day was them two of them pointing at each other. Yes. It's like you have to. America expects this, and I think to a degree it has to do with the fact that we have two men running, right? So if, let's say, if there were a woman suddenly, as one of the candidates, you would see a different attitude. But that's, a big part of we've got to make sure people look strong. And it's interesting. I've done some phone banking for Elizabeth Warren, and it's interesting. I'll call folks who may not know much about either candidate, but they'll say, I'm for this, the guy, yeah, he's tough. It's almost like that truck driving image is what they see as, what makes for a strong candidate.
Well, but it does circle back to the foreign policy question. Because when that comes up in the foreign policy discussion debate on Monday, part of it is going to be who's strong enough. Right. And that has been Mitt Romney's thing. I want to be a strong presence to let people know that you can't push us around.
Right. But I also think, that, Barack has opportunities there when, Romney talks about, slapping tariffs on China in sort of a wanton kind of way. Right. If he's a businessman, he ought to know better than that. Can you say, hoot Smiley, all right? He should know better than that. And Obama ought to point that out, that you cannot willy-nilly to score points, slap tariffs against China because you don't like exactly what they're doing with their currency. There are diplomatic ways to do that, and he's made some progress. More needs to be made, but that kind of hostility to his country as large and economically important as China just does not serve the United States' interests, business, workers, consumers, anybody.
It'll be interesting to see if China plays as big a role in the foreign policy debate as it did in the second debate. I think each of them must have said China at least 10 times, right? But that's an economic issue that they were talking about in terms of economic issue, protectionism, that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if it comes up.
It's international trade.
But also, I was going to say foreign policy is an economic issue for folks here. I know to your point that people aren't often wanting to pay attention or know where Syria is, but the bottom line, Afghanistan, something we've not heard a lot about in any of these discussions, costing us millions and millions of dollars. Right. And I would argue that the sentiment about our being in Afghanistan has moved, and a lot of Americans are like, get out. Yes. Why are we there? So that's a really important tie to what is happening right here.
That's right, which is probably also why Joe Biden scored points on that very issue in his debate with Ryan, because he talked about not staying in Afghanistan, but leaving Afghanistan and taking that money, transferring the money that would be saved on this war in Afghanistan and putting it on domestic priorities. And that's precisely why he scored points on that.
And why is the president not talking about it?
I just want to get back to a second to China.
Well, I think he's going to have to.
For just a second. I would be surprised if Bain Capital and offshoring does not also enter into the discussion. I think it becomes difficult to talk about China and slapping tariffs, on China. In violation of, as you pointed out, modern, like international law, and also not talk about, like offshoring, Bain Capital's role and Mitt Romney's role in that process.
Well, that's another tie to the foreign issues. That's and I just want to alert everybody that we'll be going onto the web to continue this conversation because we have much more to say about this, but. We've just discussed 2 or 3 ways in which the foreign policy issues can be tied back home, and I think Bob Schieffer is quite skilled enough to do that.
Right.
Absolutely. That's why I know there was a lot of debate about who the moderators should be and so on and so forth. But so far, I don't think I haven't been that greatly disappointed.
Really?
Not that greatly disappointed.
The first debate is problematic, to say the least. To say the least. But I think Martha Raddatz and Callie Crossley, and now we don't know how Bob Schieffer is going to do, but his performance in the past have performances in the past.
I don't have a problem with all of the moderators that they chose, even despite Jim Lehre's poor performance, quite excellent by reputation and by action. However, there is something wrong with not having a broader diversity of folks doing it.
I agree with.
And by the way, Callie Crossley said on CNN that she chose certain people in the audience to ask questions because she did not want to have all white men and all white women at the podium. She thought that was inappropriate. So she was trying to address the fact that that in this space there needs to be some more diversity exhibited, which embodies being American.
That's right.
But isn't it interesting that it always ends up being that, okay, well, we'll get a few people at the end, I mean, and I understand the setup here. She, doesn't have a say in who's the moderator, and this is the commission's decision. But it trickles down to just that. Okay, we're going to get we're going to get the Latino person here to talk about immigration. We're going to get the woman here to talk about this. And it's like that's the extent to which we're going to have this discussion.
Well, and it should be said that the associations, the reporter associations for Black and Hispanic journalists sent in questions to the commission, hoping that they would get asked, which had a different perspective. No, not accepted.
That's right. And Unity, this consortium of journalists, also spoke with the commission on debates many months ago, trying to influence, trying to get a Latino or a African American person, Native American person, on as the moderator, without any success. That did not.
One of those anchors from Univision certainly should have been picked.
Absolutely.
Precisely.
Certainly.
That just didn't make any sense, and I don't think we'll see that again. Actually, I don't think that'll happen again.
To continue the conversation, see past episodes, or discover new stories, please visit our website at basicblack.org.